Good evening, folks. Thank you for coming out. The Planning Commission is going to open its meeting at this time. Is this better? Can you hear it? Am I heard? Yeah, I got a little.
Yes.
Test.
We hear you.
Test. Oh, close. All right. Welcome, everyone. We're the Hartland Planning Committee. We're going to open up our meeting, and then the Select Board will open theirs. So we're opening the meeting of the Hartland Planning Commission. I'd like a motion to forego the reading of the notes of the last meeting. Seconded twice. And at this juncture, it's your meeting. Yep.
That would be even better.
Take two. Tonight is a special joint meeting with the Planning Commission and Industrial Tower Wireless, ITW. Purpose is to allow a discussion of the proposed communication tower with the general public, you. So thank you all for coming tonight and braving the cold. We have, as a select board, some short business to conduct. We need to approve the warrants, or in my terms, accounts payable, so people can get paid tomorrow before beginning the discussion. So with that, I would look for a motion to accept the warrants. Thank you, Tom. A second. Thank you, Chase. Any discussion? John, there were on page 5, 3 rather large appropriations. Can you explain what those are?
Sure. So sure, those are just the second half payments for the Hartland Rescue Squad, the elementary school, and the fire department. We split their appropriations up, and one at the beginning of the year and one halfway through the year.
Thank you. Any other questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
Jim.
Thank you. Our fifth member, Jim Riley, is connecting via Zoom. Thank you, Jim. Without objection, I have asked John Brooker Campbell, our town manager, to review the tower approval process so that we are all in the same playing field tonight. With that.
Sure. Thanks, Phil. So just real quick, so the purpose of the meeting is to have an open discussion with the folks from Industrial Tower and Wireless here in the room. There's been a lot of questions, as we've seen on the listserv, and other questions that have come up. So we invited them here, have this open discussion, hopefully get some answers to some of the outstanding questions. Before we get started, though, like Phil said, I want to make sure everybody understands the process. So right now, Industrial Tower and Wireless had submitted a 60-day notice letter on November 15th. That's just an intent to file an application. At this point, there is no formal application submitted. Sure. So that went to the Vermont Public Utilities Commission, or the PUC. You'll probably hear it referred to as the PUC throughout the course of the evening. Once a formal application is submitted, the town will have 30 days to submit comments to the Public Utilities Commission. And then once that 30 days is passed, depending on the application, the PUC will make a determination and decision probably 60 or 180 days after that application. Following the decision by the PUC, anybody could potentially appeal that decision to the Vermont Supreme Court. Are there questions on the process before we get started? Great.
This evening, we've asked Matt Dunn, our town moderator, to actually moderate the meeting. He will run the next phase of our meeting and introduce the ITW team as well. Thank you, Matt.
Great. Okay, let me just give a sense of how to do this. This is not a formal town meeting. I'm not going to do Robert's Rules of but we're going to try to make sure that we have a process where everyone to ask a question can, if there are follow-up questions, they can do that as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from ITW, make a presentation, and then we are going to take questions from the audience here. We will then look to people who are joining us online. If they have questions, they will be allowed to chime in. From there, we will then have, if there are additional questions from either the Planning Commission or the Select Board for ITW to be able to ask those questions, which may not have already been exhausted by the ones that have been asked by the folks who are here or online. I am going to try to make sure that everyone is heard. So we'll ask people to ask a question. We will then go and go through all people who have not asked a question first, and then we can go back to someone who may have an additional question down the line. In addition, I am hopeful that we will keep things to a question and in a relatively brief area. If things start getting longer-winded, I may ask that we start to put a time limit just to make sure that everyone has a chance to have a part in this important discussion. Does that work for everyone? Yeah? Okay. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the folks from Industrial Tower. Yeah. I'm good.
And I'm a permitting attorney in Burlington. Industrial wire. Industrial wire.
Your audio
I'm
is cutting in and out.
Industrial wireless. We've got Kevin Delaney and Eric Callow. They're going to be presenting the project tonight. As John ran through, this is part of the initial PUC process. Industrials put forward a 60-day notice with an intent to construct a tower. I get this wrong all the time. I always call it Hill Farm Road. It's Town Hill Farm Road. It's 232 Town Hill Farm Road. They'll walk you through the tower. It's a new tower designed to cover a gapping coverage, roughly about 5-mile gapping coverage on the Route 12 corridor. Industrial's here to hear your concerns. They understand that the town has expressed some of them. They think it is an important gapping coverage. They've looked heavily at co-location opportunities. There were none presented. They're trying to be sensitive to the overall aesthetics of the town of Hartland while still addressing a pretty significant gap along a relatively well-traveled state highway, which is the intent of the legislature. So we're going to try to keep things brief. I know everyone has, or many of you have questions and we want to give you an opportunity to have those questions answered as best we can. We also know that there's probably other things you want to do this evening with your time. So without much delay, I'm going to turn it over to, I guess, Kevin or Eric, who's next. And we're here to hear your questions after a brief presentation.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Delaney, and I am the Vice President of Site Acquisition and Development for Industrial Tower and Wireless. First of all, should I move this forward? What works for everyone here? I don't want to block the view from the board either, so I'm not sure if anybody wants to move so they can get a better view. We have several site plans to go over tonight. So first of all, as was mentioned, our proposal is for a 160-foot lattice-style tower, and it's located off of Town Farm Hill Road. Now, the property itself is 146 acres, and it is outlined in yellow on this plan. And the tower proposal is on the northern portion of the parcel itself. Now, access to the property is through an existing entrance. Through an existing entrance right here on Town Hill Farm Road. And we're going to be utilizing a 25-foot wide access and utility easement. So within that actual easement, we're looking to construct a 12-foot wide access driveway. All the utilities to the site from the public road to the tower itself are proposed to be underground. On the property itself, we're leasing a 100-foot by 100-foot area. So that's this box you see up here. Again, for your reference, if you can't see it where you're sitting, this is Town Farm Hill Road right here. And this is the access that I was describing to the 100-foot by 100-foot lease area. Now, within that lease area, we're proposing to build an 80-foot by 80-foot communications compound, which will be fenced. It'll have an 8-foot high chain link fence around it with a 12-foot wide gate at the entrance to it. There's also a turnaround in front of the access for larger vehicles to be able to turn around. Now, within the compound itself, there'll be 6 inches of 3/4 inch crushed stone. The tower style that we're proposing is a lattice style tower. And again, it'll be in the center of that 80-foot by 80-foot compound. Now, the tower is 160 feet. On top of the tower are what we call omni antennas. So those are whip style antennas, and they're about 13 feet in length. So the tower itself is 160 feet, and then there'll be blue antennas on the top, 5 of them, adding another 13 feet. So the total is 173 feet. So again, it's a 160-foot tower with 13-foot antennas at the top. Now, the shelter for the transmitter equipment is at the base of the tower. So we have a small shelter at the base, and then additional carriers as they co-locate will locate in that same area. There's an existing buffer of trees along Town Farm Hill Road, as well as where the property with the 100-foot by 100-foot lease area is. So we don't clear anything beyond the 100-foot by 100-foot. So we're leaving quite a bit of buffer left. So you won't be able to see any of the ground equipment from a public way. It'll all be behind that buffer. This tower does not require any type of lighting, so there's no beacon or anything like that on top of the tower. We know that because we've already filed an application with the FAA, and they determined that there is no hazard to air navigation in the area, and there's no tower light required on the top of the tower. So there'll be no lighting on it whatsoever. Now, the radio system that Industrial Tower and Wireless is proposing here is an ESMR system. It stands for Enhanced Specialized Mobile Radio. It's a 2-way radio network. Basically, right now, our company operates this network in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Maine. And we're looking to expand our services in Vermont. We've already have multiple towers approved and built in Vermont where we're building this network. Eventually, we want to provide statewide coverage. Thanks, AJ, for showing this. This is an example of what a lattice-style tower looks like and what I was describing prior. So the tower structure itself, and then the antennas are top-mounted, and you can see there's a receive antenna below it. When selecting a tower, we attempt to find a location that doesn't only meet our needs as ESMR provider, but it also provides needs for the national carriers that exist in this market. So that includes carriers such as your Verizon, your AT&T, T-Mobile, US Cellular, and Dish networks. So we look for a site that's not just going to be one person using it. It's not just going to be a radio tower, but it also provides services for the national wireless carriers. And so that's what part of what our company does is we're an infrastructure provider. It's hard for a lot of these major wireless carriers to come to a rural area like Vermont and spend the money that costs to provide the services that they want to provide. So companies like us provide the infrastructure to be able to do it. Most of the carriers today, I've been doing this for 30 years, most of the carriers today, they don't come with proposals like this in front of the town. They wait until we get the approvals needed before they commit to locating on the site. As well as a lot of carriers, you think a tower goes up and all the carriers would jump on it, but that's also not the way it happens. They have budgets, and so it comes in stages. Some years, Verizon does a lot of build-outs, and they'll do a lot of construction and network development. Another year, it may be AT&T. A year after that, it could be T-Mobile. But eventually, they will come. I can guarantee you one thing too, this site is built to be able to co-locate those carriers, so there wouldn't be another need for a tower in this area to provide service to the same coverage gap. As was mentioned, we're providing, this site would provide service for the carriers. Right now, there's currently a 4 to 5 mile gap along Route 12 that this particular site would provide the coverage to. So we believe that we found a very nice location for this tower. We did a visibility study, and you might not be able to see it from where you're sitting, but this basically is a computer-generated study that shows where the visibility of the site itself will be. So the site is in the middle of the map here, and then you see these red rings that surround the site, and those are a mile in distance. So the yellow represents what the visibility would be if there were no trees. So picture no trees in the area, it would be quite visible in the yellow. But when you take into account the tree coverage for the area, and we get that information from the state of Vermont, it's what they call LiDAR information, you can see that it's much less visible. The blue area represents where this site will be visible in the town. So not quite as much as the yellow. You'll see some areas where there's yellow and blue speckles. So that basically means that you'll be able to see some of it through the trees during the winter months. But where you see the full blue areas is where it would be fully visible. And when I say fully visible, it's the top half of the tower that would be visible. You'll never see the ground equipment from any of these distances. Yeah, so this is, again, as I mentioned, it's... Yep, so what I described so far up until this point is computer generated. So that's visibility where this is seen. We also flew a balloon at the same time to confirm that was correct. And so there's a balloon float that happened. So we hired a company that flew 2 balloons, one at 150 feet and one at 160 feet. And then they basically drove around and confirmed the visibility in these areas to see where it could be seen. And they've done some photo simulations on exactly where it could be seen. So this is Route 12 here. This picture is taken about 1.9 miles away. It's not visible from Route 12. You can't see it on Route 12, so there's no visibility here. There is another location. This site is about 2 miles away, and this is at the intersection of Ayers Lane and Town Farm Hill Road, and you can see the tower in the middle of the visibility there. I would say it's probably the top half of the tower that you could see. Again, I'll go through these. I'll be happy to go back to any of them if anyone has any questions. This next one is taken from 104 Town Farm Hill Road, and it's 1.5 miles away, and this is the visibility of the tower itself. And then I'll just go through this, and then we'll...
60 feet.
There was 2 balloons. One was flown at 150 and one at 160. Excuse me?
We're looking finish the presentation, but we will follow up.
We can go back.
So to be clear, that's AGL. That's height off of the ground above. That's at 50. So if you say it's 150-foot tower, it's 150 feet AGL from the base. And, obviously that translates to a uniform elevation of some, 1,150 feet or something like that. But when you calculate tower height, typically under the PUC, it's AGL. So 173 AGL and 150 AGL. And so the balloon was floated at 160 AGL, which is the height of the constructed lattice work tower.
Yep, so we just have a few more pictures to go through here. This is another location at 150 Weed Road in Hartland, where the site is visible, and you can see it here. Now, this wasn't visible from the road. You actually had to pull over and walk into this field in order to be able to see the site itself. So that's just a general idea of where the site is going to be visible. And that's pretty much the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has, or between the three of us, we could answer anything.
So what I want to do is start off. What I want to do is start off with where cells. So if folks from Industrial Tower and Wireless are up for it, we're probably going to be going back pages. So questions clarify on the presentation itself. Yes. And we're asking folks to use them not just for amplifying.
Can I ask when the balloon test was done? Because we built our house last year and it's 700 feet from where this compound is going to be. So I'd like to know exactly when you did this work.
Oh.
Particularly on if there are things that you're still thinking about or wanting to from the
just one distance. Am I good? Now I'm audible. About 5 miles along the road where there's no signal. And so is this all about driving along the road, or is this going to help the local, how many local residents might benefit from this? And also,
So it's a good question. And I mentioned Route 12, but it also covers all the surrounding roads that connect to Route 12. So it will connect to all the residents who live on that road and who live off that road. So it's currently quite a large coverage gap that it's filling. With regard to our network, we're expanding through the entire state of Vermont. So we're providing services. So the type of users on our network are companies such as, first of all, public safety agencies, schools, and then construction type companies, landscaping companies, blue collar, like oil, transportation companies, and that type of thing will also benefit from it.
we need. We're not.
I'd like to know what's underground.
Can you identify yourself when you ask your question?
Deborah LaQueer from Town Farm Hill Road. What is underground?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't. Right, so the electricity, telephone, will all be.
Yeah, the river.
Gary Trotcher. As I understand, which is a very different type of antenna than the sector antennas that cell phone providers typically use. So it's a two-part question. What frequency range do you folks use versus the cell phone providers? Have you done an RF analysis of that area, of the area that you're planning to fill for both your network and for potential cell phone providers?
Mike's not on. And the carrier, like your Verizon, your AT&T antennas, are these panel tile style antennas that are below it. So those are arrays. So these arrays need to have 10 feet of vertical separation between them. So our equipment is top mounted, and then the next antenna array below that would be the co-locator carrier. Our system works off 900 megahertz. It's a 900 megahertz two-way radio network. Now, as far as the carriers go, they operate on a slew of frequencies, starting in the 800 and 700 megahertz range, all the way up to the 1900 megahertz and 3600 megahertz range. And yes, we have done RF studies, we've done propagation studies to confirm the coverage needs of both of ourselves and the major wireless carriers.
I'm going to recognize Chris next.
Hi, Chris Nippenberg. Process, did you actually look at our town plan and look at what our citizens want here and how that conforms or doesn't conform with the town plan?
But before I give it to AJ to talk about the town plan, first we listened to the concerns of the carriers where they want to provide service, and we hear news articles about things like public safety. The police cruisers that drive around in this town, drive around all throughout Vermont, they need network coverage. They need coverage to the cell phone carriers to be able to provide public safety. And so we're trying to provide a service not only to the carriers, but to public safety as well as 900 megahertz. So our first thing that we want to do is provide that wireless network coverage to the citizens of Vermont. Most of the town plans, they don't cooperate with that. And with that, I'll let AJ talk a little bit.
Well, thank you. As a provider of wireless services, you have really several considerations. One is the town plan, and your town plan reflects the second consideration quite substantially, which is there another place to put this? Is there a co-location opportunity available? And industrial spent a lot of time trying to figure out, is there a co-location opportunity that addresses this gap? And the short answer is no. They looked at church steeples, which is farm silos is usually a great place to co-locate these things, but there isn't one that worked here. And your town plan is very clear, no lights, so this doesn't have lights, and no new facilities unless if there's an opportunity to co-locate, and there isn't one that we found. So that was a part of the consideration early on. And as to the visual impact, it's as low as it can be to fill what industrial sees as a gap. And to the extent any vegetative buffer can be provided, which is recommended in your plan, that's being tried to achieve by not overly clearing the site and leaving the existing tree coverage around the built enclosure. To the extent that the town plan has specific policies, which I think one could debate, the industrials tried to incorporate that while providing, a way to fill a gap, both as the two-way radio frequency network that they have is quite important. It's a public safety radio frequency network. It's not just all 5G, cell coverage. It's not just all Instagram. It's also important for public safety. State police uses it. They've been particularly adamant that they want to see more of this. And the tower itself provides 2 opportunities for co-location, which is exactly what your town plan wants. So when future carriers come in, Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, they can co-locate on this tower that's been constructed already, achieving what is clearly an intent, which is to limit the number of these things that predominate. And, ultimately, there are only so many places where you can locate a facility with cooperating landowners, and this happened to be the one that worked to fill the gap. So, industrial in moving forward takes the town plan consideration into the account and has tried to meet the specific guidelines and policies, particularly the co-location import.
Side of the roof.
Hi, Rich Lyman, Town Farm Hill Road, I'm in a butter. And just to go back to the last question for a second, I think specifically, even though ITW is proposing a tower that is as low as it can be, to use your words, it's still, and I'll let the town speak to it, does not conform with the town plan, to be clear. But that wasn't my question. I guess my question is, T-Mobile just made a major announcement was that they are hooking into Starlink, and that satellites will now in rural areas be a primary way that you can text and use your phone eventually to send data in terms of browsing the web, doing your things. And coincidentally today, for the first time, my phone asked me in an area where there was no cell coverage if I wanted to point it to a satellite so I could send a text. So I guess my long-winded question is, how does ITW contemplate with technology changing so fast that this tower won't be obsolete in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, knowing that Starlink is trying to get this in the mainstream, and I think we're talking about probably older technology that ITW is building.
One of them was what would happen if it became obsolete, which is a good question. We would take it down. We would, if there are no users, no active users on the site, it's wasting space. So we would absolutely take it down if it wasn't being utilized, or if it became, the technology at some point became obsolete. As I mentioned, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've been hearing for about 30 years that satellite is going to take over and we won't need these. But the truth of the matter is, satellite doesn't go through trees, it doesn't go through buildings. You need to have that line of sight to the sky to see it, and it's affected by environmental concerns where a ground-based communication system doesn't have that same effect, and it can be used inside buildings, inside structures, inside trees, where you can't get signal from a satellite.
Okay, that's fine.
Can you hear me? My name is Jennifer Barrett Reed, also from Town Farm Hill Road. The question, when were I believe you referred to them as RF and propagation studies, when were those conducted? And when you did conduct those, did you also account for the potential coverage and range of the many, many other towers that have been approved or at least given certificates of good standing by the PUC in the same region?
Yep, that's a great question. And that's we have a database of all the existing towers in the state of Vermont. So we run coverage studies from those to, first of all, make sure we can't get the coverage we need from those towers. And as far as any approved towers that aren't built yet, again, we have access to that PUC website that shows us exactly where they are. So if there was something that could provide the coverage that our proposal is going to do, then there would be no need for it. So we wouldn't propose. It would be really a waste. They've been conducted throughout 2023 and 2024 while we try to find a site.
Please identify yourself.
I'm Jennifer Grant, Damon Road. Where is the closest active tower of this size and type, including the whip antennae that Gary was referencing that carry a non-cell phone wavelength, so that it would be carrying the types of wavelengths that you're adding to this tower?
Closest site that we own that does this, or just in general? Yeah, I could get that information for you. I don't have it with me tonight, but that's something I could provide to the town at a later time.
I have a couple of questions. First, you've talked a couple of times tonight about coming here to fill a gap and to address public safety concerns. I just want to be clear, and if I'm wrong, tell me. Nobody asks you to come and do that, right? This is a circumstance in which you all identified an area, you blanketed it with letters to see who might let you build a tower so that you could make money from building it. Am I correct in that? Okay, I'm not clear whether I can go ahead or you want me to wait.
Willing to do. I'm just asking. Not be.
Understood. You're looking to fill a gap, and I want to understand whether that's a gap in your network, which I understand is so far not operational, or a gap in cell service. Because over the past couple of years, there have been 14 projects within 10 miles of the shallow property where you're proposing to build this. Within the past 6 months, 4 of those have been granted certificates by the Public Utilities Commission, including a tower that is on Mount Scottney, which is going to be augmented. Thank you. Sorry. With an application that was just filed on January 2nd of 2025. There's a 100-foot tower located 4.8 miles away, a second 100-foot tower located 5.3 miles away, a 120-foot tower located 6, and 131 tower, a 131-foot tower located 7.5 miles away. So the question is, have you considered all of that in assessing that this is necessary to fill a gap? And is that gap a gap in your non-operational network?
First of all, our is operational. I think I mentioned.
But not in Vermont.
We can't turn the network on until we have sites that are up and on the network, as well as the major wireless carriers. And to your other point about the sites, we're very familiar with those. And as part of our filing with the PUC, we'll be describing those sites and why they don't work.
Right now, both.
Okay. First,
358 Town Farm Hill Road. I just want to say that I don't think people are concerned about the view from the road. What people are concerned about is the view from their property, their homes on the top of the hills, the Green Mountain Horse Association, the bike tour people come to cross-country ski, ride snowmobiles. Those are the people for whom the tower will not be hidden when you're down in the gully and Route 12. And I think that trying to say that this is something that people won't see is unreasonable, and it's really doesn't conform to the town plan or what anybody wants who lives here.
Yeah, I didn't hear a question. Was there a question or was just a statement? Just want to.
The visibility isn't apparent to people who live here.
That wasn't the statement. The tower will be visible from certain properties in certain locations. That's absolutely true. The statement was that you couldn't see it from Route 12 on that site based on the test. There are plenty of other images that you can see the tower. We're not going to tell you you can't see it. That wasn't what Kevin said.
Yes. Wait for a mic.
My name is Gloria Merritt. I am 1.5 miles away, and very probably I will have a very good view at the top of this. And the Hartland Planning Commission has stated in its letter of January 14th, 2025, that 173-foot tower, the tower at face value, greatly exceeds the allowable height of one of the most scenic settings in all of Hartland. It's my understanding that once a tower is built, it can be higher with no public process. In other words, a 100-foot tower can be increased to 120 feet after it's constructed, and the community will have no input. And my reference to this is the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, Section 6409A. Under that, the state or local government may not deny and shall approve any eligible facilities requests for a modification of an existing wireless tower or base station that does not substantially change the physical dimensions of such tower or base station. The FCC considers eligible facility requests to include requests for carrier co-locations and for replacing existing antennas and ground equipment with larger antennas, equipment, and more antennas and equipment. The FCC has proposed applying a 4-pronged test, and I'll leave and all of this information here on the desk if anybody wants to pick it up. But I would like to know, since it appears that what you're telling us is the height of the tower can be modified at any time without asking us, then is that true?
Without speaking for the Vermont Public Utilities Commission, I do not believe that is true. That is not 30 VSA 248A's position, nor the legislature of the state of Vermont, nor has the Vermont PUC adopted that 2012 provision. I've heard it referenced before. Under 248A, there are very clear standards for when a modification can be made without any public comment, and that's when there's no substantial impact. Usually that's when simply the antennas that get located get replaced. For example, right now across the state, many people are converting 3G or 4G LTE antennas to 5G panel antennas, which are actually smaller and decreasing the overall aerial coverage of antennas, i.e. the square footage of antenna. And the PUC has put forward substantial case law on this that says, if you're making the antennas smaller, you don't need any permitting for us. But other than that, if you're increasing the tower height or you're increasing the square footage of the base enclosure, or particularly adding a substantial amount, significant, it's up to the PUC to determine what that actually means. But if you're adding square footage of antennas, the PUC has de minimis application requirements, which still require notice, and limited size and scope applications, which still require notice. And they also have full applications, depending on how much modification. So I don't believe that's an accurate statement. I cannot say. Industrial's not proposing a tower that's higher. I have no idea what 20 years from now might bring. I have no clue. Oh, they may not. They may change the requirements. It may become obsolete in 5 years and the thing has to get taken down as a requirement of its CPG.
Questions from anyone who has not asked a question yet? I just want to make sure we're in the. Okay. Can we, I want to see if there are any questions from folks who are joining us online. Nope. Okay. Then I'll go back to folks who.
Matt, can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Hi, Jim.
Hi.
Jim, we were going to take questions from the select board and the planning commission after the rest of the public comment or questions. Is that okay? All right. Yep. Yes.
My name is Bruce Merritt. I live on Creampot Road. You mentioned that there's going to be underground power coming to this site and a telephone line. I find that kind of ironic, but here's what my question is. Are you going to have a generator there in case the power fails? Because it does fail. And if so, how big? What's it going to run off? Have you done a decibel test for people that wildlife? So what kind is that going to make?
That's a good question. At the moment, we are not proposing a generator. We have battery backup on our network that provides the backup power that we, when a major wireless carrier comes, they will likely install a generator and they will have to provide that information.
How loud that might be. You've built these and you've had people come and put generators in before. Did I make about them?
I've worked on a few of these, and typically the generator is a backup generator only in the event of a power failure. Typically that generator is with a backup diesel tank with a spill control prevention. I can tell you that I've heard those generators running and they're, no louder than a typical backup generator at anybody's house. They're relatively small. There isn't a lot of power that's drawn by these in an event of power failure. I mean, I actually, my neighbor put in an HVAC unit. I've only ever seen two on a compound. There's really only space typically for two co-locations on a particular tower. I can only tell you that there's some pretty clear decibel limitations that are encoded throughout this, and it's typically not more than 60 decibels at the property line. Background noise off of a road is generally around 55 decibels. So unless you're standing right at the property line and literally at the quietest time of the night, you probably wouldn't hear it different than any car passing along the road. That's just been my experience, but there's none proposed in this project.
Yeah, I just want to say, as an infrastructure provider, what we've done before at other sites where this is the concern is we provide one generator. You mentioned 5 generators at the site. We provide one generator that all the carriers can share, so you don't have multiple generators going off. And I can tell you the generators that we install have what's called a hospital-grade muffler system on them, so they're quite quiet. As was mentioned, it's almost like similar to a vehicle running near your house. It all depends on what the demand is. It could be a 60K, 65K. It depends on what the needs are for the carriers.
Hi, I'm Barbara Peck and I live on Advent Hill Road. I guess I have a question about how far down the road we are with this, and that you talked about a cooperating landowner. And is there an opportunity here to back out? If change the mind, and if not, or if so, I would imagine that the reason this is somewhat appealing is it's a pretty easy shot from Town Farm Hill Road to build a 12-foot roadway with a buffer of trees to a 100 by 100 foot square, but it would be much more difficult to navigate up to the top of a very large piece of property that might be further out of the sight line of all the people who live around it. And I just wondered if there might be another better place for this. Maybe it would cost you more to put it in, but that was.
Let me the agreement with agreement with the current cooperating landowner, is that set? And the other question is, are there other options possible to be used?
So the first answer is yes, it is set. We have an agreement with the property owner that we've worked extensively with. We did look at multiple properties. This wasn't the first property we came to. We looked at, and if you'd like, I could have Eric speak to that, but Eric Callio is our site acquisition specialist, and that's what he did. He spent time talking to different people in the town to see if they'd be willing to lease space to be in a location that works to provide the service that's needed. It's true, we could find a property that's not near anything, that could have a road that's a mile long to get to it, and it's far away from everything, but it won't provide the service and the coverage that's needed with our site. So you can't just pick any random location and say, why don't you go there? It needs to meet RF coverage objectives.
Can I add one more comment to that as part of that? The other issue is the town plan is also pretty clear that it doesn't want substantial clearing in forested areas. It wants to preserve as much natural resource cover as possible. It wants to preserve any impacts to water, pathways, wetlands, steep slopes, natural resources. And so if you look at a site that you're going to have to put a 2,000-foot driveway in, you're now running into other, objectives of the town. And so in balancing that out, this was the property that industrial felt achieved the best balance between service provision and resource protection.
The question all the way in the back.
I'm Cheyenne Latimer. Is about real estate values in the area. I think a lot of people move to Town Farm Hill Road, Weed Road, the other surrounding roads looking for that rural feel in Hartland. They're out of the village and such. And I'm just concerned about when people go to sell their properties, what's that value going to look like with something so close and something so large in that area? Thank you.
I have done development law in Vermont for a long time, and that is a concern that I've heard many times. And I've been on that side of the table, making that very same point for people who have hired me to oppose projects just like this. And I can tell you, in my years of doing this, I've rarely ever seen anything control property values other than the overall interest rate. Everybody lives in a house or drives on a road or shops somewhere that somebody objected to, saying this is going to destroy property values. From the first settler to Vermont, the guy who was, or the woman who was here before, said this is going to destroy the neighborhood. And it has happened time and time and time again. Now, I think there's obviously heartfelt concerns, but as to property values, they have been controlled by the overall prevailing interest rate more than any other single factor I've ever seen.
Okay. Is there anyone else who hasn't asked a question yet, either online or here, that would like to ask a question?
I'm online.
We have two online. Okay. All right. Please state your name and ask your question.
My name's David Lyman. I'm a neighboring abutter. My question is, our property is right next to where this tower is being proposed. Our well happens to be very close to the property line. It's a shallow well. And you're talking about digging up, lines for power, electric, building a road. How are we going to deal with the implications of likely groundwater interference with our well right there?
The project has to comply with your well isolation distance standard of the state of Vermont, and it does.
In what way?
More than 500 feet off the property line, and construction as well outside any well isolation distance.
Okay. Question from someone online? Okay. Please identify yourself and ask your question.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yep.
We're just wondering, has anyone considered the possible health effects of proximity to a cell tower? It's my understanding there's well-documented studies that do show negative health effects.
State your name.
My name is Jenny Sizik, and we live up on Bird Hill.
Again, fair question. And the federal government has promulgated standards that this tower must meet. Those standards take precedence under the Federal Communications Act, and any tower with cell coverage service or radio coverage service has to meet those standards to comply with federal law, and this one does. And those are standards that are promulgated for those particular effect concerns.
Okay, well, I beg to differ.
Thank you for chiming in. Anyone else who has not asked a question yet? In which case, I will go do it. And then we'll just... Okay.
Hi, Vicky, 306 Weed Road. We're in a butter to the property. There are two vernal ponds, one on the Reed property and one directly on the other side of the stone wall from the tower. And I already spoke to the Conservation Commission, who has concerns about migratory patterns of certain species. And I just wanted to know if specific to that.
Can I ask a follow-up to that question? Yeah, may I? Migratory patterns, species on the ground, terrestrial, or what?
Toad in the town, that's been, and salamander, et cetera.
Okay, so I'm going to question you. You mentioned vernal pools. So vernal pools are regulated as Class 2 wetlands in the state of Vermont. They have a 50-foot buffer around them. There are vernal pools off the property. There's no vernal pools on the property. There's no wetland buffer that is impacted by this property. The property does not cross any wetland buffer that they've analyzed. That is a 248A consideration. And in doing the planning for this, they've located all construction outside of any wetland buffer, which would apply to a vernal pool wetland buffer. As to the migratory patterns, that's under rare and irreplaceable natural areas or critical wildlife habitat. The initial review indicates that there's none impacted from this. There's no critical wildlife habitat that is impacted by the construction, and there's no rare and irreplaceable natural area that is impacted by the construction. Well, that's first marked by the Agency of Natural Resources. They identify those places on the Agency of Natural Resources Natural Resource Atlas. Those are promulgated by Department of Parks and Rec, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Wetlands. Yeah, did you already do an on-site wetlands analysis? Yeah, so Du Bois and King, the other engineers, have done an on-site wetlands analysis. The state may ask them to do another one at some point in the 248A process, but that typically isn't. So yes, they did. Du Bois and King did do that work.
Additional. Yeah, we'll start there and move across.
Jennifer Reed from 294 Town Farm Hill Road. You mentioned several times tonight that you tried to find co-location alternatives. I'm curious, has ITW availed itself of any actual co-location alternatives on any of its other projects in Vermont? And then my second question is, does ITW make the same amount of money when it is using somebody else's site for a co-location?
So we have leased space off towers that. The second question, I don't think is something that we should be answering.
Okay.
Hi, AJ, it's Kevin Reed again. When I asked you earlier whether this gap that you're looking to close.
Right now, it's both.
The PUC today that gap isn't going to be closed by any of the 4 projects that have gotten the certificate of appropriateness in the past 6 months that are within 10 miles of shallow, including the modifications to the Mount Scottney tower.
We will when we file our application with the PUC as part of the process.
I mean, to be clear, we filed it of intention. When the application gets ready, all of the material has to be double checked. I mean, part of the reason of having this meeting, so that we're clear, is we want to hear the concerns. If there's a tower that provides coverage, we're going to have a different conversation. We're going to look, ITW is going to look to make sure that there isn't another co-location opportunity. It didn't find one when it filed a 60-day notice. It hasn't found one before. PUC is going to make sure we require that. We don't see one. I know you disagree.
Work to ascertain where the gaps in.
Do you know what the
that you did the work to ascertain where the gaps in coverage were in 2023 and 2024? I'm pointing out to you that there are projects within 10 miles of this, including one on Mount Scottney, that were greenlighted just within the past 6 months. So what I'm trying to understand is whether you all have all.
So the work was done as of that 60-day notice, including any tower that was available on the PUC website. If there's a proper promulgation plot from that January 2nd tower that shows this being covered, we'll have to take that into consideration. But there wasn't one that ITW saw. November 24.
Deborah? Okay.
I'd like to understand about Mount Scottney. There is something that's much taller than any other place around. It already has a tower. I gather from some other people here that that can maybe be built on. Why wouldn't you use Mount Scottney? It's
so have not been able to provide coverage to this area.
Go to Gary.
The
And I'm sorry, I'm going to ask people to, just because we're recording it, to state your name again. Thank you.
Does the 4.5 miles on Route 12 require a 170-foot tower?
Yes.
Here.
Red light on.
That provide the structural integrity needed for the antennas and potential cell phone sector antennas rather than a lattice tower.
So we feel that a lattice tower is less visible because you can see through it. But if that was a concern, if you prefer as a town to see a monopole style tower as opposed to a lattice style tower, we would switch it to a monopole if that was something that was a concern.
I want to be sure that was Gary's question. Gary, what was your question again?
The term waterfall. Okay, thank you. Yes, my question was about a monopole tower. Thank you.
Other questions? Anyone else? Yep, right here.
Ione Minot. I've neglected to say that when I asked my question way back at the beginning. I'm used to driving around and seeing the cell towers that have like a big little like branches of cell antennas coming off of them, almost like robotic upsticking arms with extra stuff. Are those old like 3G technology that is now being replaced by the flat 5Gs?
So
how visible companies' antennas of them. You can see from Route 89 heading down into New Hampshire off to the whatever northeast of the interstate, where yeah, the central tower is pretty skinny and wimpy, but then there are these huge honking things coming off near the top. And I'm wondering if that's what we can expect these days for the cell antennas that you want to convince the cell companies to attach to this.
So the antenna arrays are what you're describing that are mounted on the side of the tower. As AJ had mentioned, as technology advances, those antennas are getting smaller. So they will have the antenna arrays on the tower, but the antennas themselves are getting smaller. So they'll probably look less obstructive than you feel the ones that are currently on the side of 89.
They're also able to locate now behind the antenna panels. Some of the other equipment goes behind it. And so right now the 5G antenna panels are 72 inches by, they're like the size of a door, basically. And there's usually one per, was it azimuth, one per sector array. So there's usually 3 to provide coverage around 360. So there's an array here, an array here, and an array here. They're getting typically smaller. The goal is to reduce the overall amount of square footage of antennas on any tower. It's cheaper to build.
Questions? Okay. With that, what we're going to do is we're going to turn it over to questions from the Select Board and Planning Commission. And I'm going to go back and forth, right? And I know Jim has a question, which if it's okay with folks, we'd take first, if that's all right. Okay. Jim, are you still with us?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Please go ahead.
Okay, I think this is a two-part question. First part is, and I'm sorry if I missed this, the audio broke up a little bit, but how do you address the issue in the town plan where there's no structures allowed over the tree canopy? And the second part really is, of all the projects you've done in Vermont, how many have been opposed by the towns and how many towns have won in their opposition?
So to answer the question about the town plan, I think in the telecommunications section, there isn't a strict prohibition, at least the way I read it, on a tower above the canopy. Nor would that functionally, I think, be practical or allow effective towers to operate. And so to the extent possible, the structure's as low as it can be to provide the gap in coverage necessary. And under,
Yeah, but there's a specific
the plan
you're avoiding here, right? There's a specific sentence that says no structures over the tree canopy. You seem to be avoiding that.
Which section are you referring to?
Look around page 1920 in the town plan. Planning Commission included it in their letter to you.
I appreciate that, but I think policy 10 in the telecommunications policy doesn't say that, and that's where I would look for the reference. I appreciate the other reference.
But that doesn't override
to provide
the lack
telecommunication.
Hear me out. The lack of a statement in one section doesn't nullify a clear statement in another section. And I think that's what your argument is right now.
I think that's an effective prohibition on cell coverage, which would violate 248A, because I don't think you can have effective telecommunications coverage without a structure over the canopy, because the canopy blocks the line of sight coverage.
Okay, let's go to the second part of the question.
Yep. So the second part of the question was, in other projects that this company has brought forward, how many have had opposition and how many have been successful despite that opposition? Jim, does that capture your question?
How many have you?
Sorry.
How many have you not done because of opposition?
Some, not zero. We don't keep tracks. Many, if not all, have.
Yeah, do you have one example?
Well, no. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes you get to a meeting, and sometimes the town expresses it. Sometimes you decide you want to press forward. Sometimes you don't. I'll be honest. Everyone's opposed at some level. Somebody objects at some point to almost every tower that's built across the state. There's none I've ever been involved in that have been uniformly supported. It's just the way it works. Not a single one has ever been 100% satisfactory to everybody in the town. I've been involved in. Somebody's going to write a letter that doesn't like a tower. So to answer your question honestly, probably 100% have been opposed at some level. And only a handful have, and they're not even fully successful.
Okay. Is there anyone who has a question? David? Hi, David. Thank you, Matt.
I just want to let my heart calm down just a little bit here, because we're going to talk briefly about the immediate area. How is it that as a boy, I could stand on Garvin Hill and look at the Croydon Ridge, which is a few miles out this way. And if I were to look there today, or up and down the valley, and looking at the New Hampshire map, There's 4 or 5 towers that go up and down the Connecticut River, which I can see from most places. And I'm having a little trouble understanding how those are not sufficient. I also can understand, I'm getting to my question, but this is the Planning Commission. I also understand that the Public Utility Commission in Vermont really doesn't have much to say or look at the towers in New Hampshire. As local residents, we can see all kinds of towers there. And like it or not, Windsor County and Grafton County are butt neighbors. So number one, have you looked at those towers in New Hampshire to see if they will provide the coverage?
Yes, we've looked at all the towers in New Hampshire and Vermont.
Okay. And on the select board side, Phil? Yep.
My questions are really about the equipment, and both the equipment on the ground and the equipment up in the air. You mentioned already in response to Bruce's question, a national carrier, should they put the antenna up, they have the 911 requirements of a battery backup and then a generator. Would the batteries all be in the same storage vault in the one that you show on the diagram, or would they be in separate vaults? And I assume the generator would be outside the vault.
Are you asking about our equipment or about carrier equipment? They would have it in their own equipment cabinet. Within the compound, yes. Yeah.
National carriers would have some components that are going to be hanging up there. One would be the antenna. One would be the radio to take the optical to an electrical. And then the third would be some sort of base unit piece. How many of those items would actually be at the top of the pole versus down below?
None of them would be at the top of the pole or the structure, because our equipment is there. Yeah, so it would be right where their array is. All their equipment would be either an antenna that you could see, or as you mentioned, a radio head, which are often mounted behind the antennas. The base, well, so the base equipment would be on the ground. So there would be, cable and fiber optic cables running from the ground up to the antenna.
But you have to talk into the.
Okay.
Just hold it right up.
Right up. February, I'm the clerk of the Planning Commission. Your question or your statement was, you came here to hear what our problems were. And there's one major problem, and that is what you're proposing is so obtrusive to the area in Hartland that we've been trying to protect and write regs in the town plan, that you've just blown it off. I haven't got a direct answer from you if you think what you're proposing is in compliance with the town plan. Part one, but please.
I think it's
You also have a problem in another town in Vermont. And a federal judge there denied your request for reconsideration. I just is, but the issues are very similar to what hey, do you for what you're trying to do? That judge's comments?
You do it. Be in your seat. I know. But if you can please, it's an awkward structure. So, and that's the other, there's a technical and
you're referring with the United States. It's industrial's view that the PUC did not conform with a 45-day shot clock requirement to issue a decision on a project. What the Second Circuit does, I don't know. I have no idea what federal courts are going to do these days. I can tell you what I think, but I'm not going to because it's an active case.
I give some latitude. I think I turned it on.
Yes, you did.
Yeah,
you did.
but I don't want it to become
No.
and I would prefer if you stood back
To the side. Oh, so people can see my smiling face.
It's just a little bit. It's a little bit. So if you could just.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to give the mic over to the select.
Oh, you sure?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Are there other questions from the select board? Huh? Yep.
Oh, thank you. For just a statement, I'm really disappointed in the graphics that you used. You're using graphics. I'm a planner they were using in the 1980s. You did not take care of any GIS or anything like this to make your project seem more realistic. And so this is really difficult to visualize, but I know when you go to the PUC, you're not going to be using these types of things. So I think you're doing a disservice to us as a community. Secondly is we have people online. They're not able to see this very clearly at all. So that's disappointing. One of my questions is how far
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought
Yep.
the existing canopy will the height of this tower be?
The canopy is 78 feet and the tower is 160 feet.
And that is correct. The top of the whip antenna is 173 AGL. The tower question is 160. So
Is going to be over 100 feet above the existing canopy today. And many of these towers, they go generally 30 to 40 feet above the existing canopy. So my question is, why is it so tall? Is it because you're trying to reach another tower at a further distance and you have height disadvantages?
We ran the coverage studies at different heights to see what would provide coverage to the coverage gap for us and the carriers. And to do that for each of the carriers, so another tower isn't needed, the tower needs to be 160 feet, which is what we proposed.
The town plan is pretty clear about the height. I've raised the issue with you about the towers that are close. and I appreciate the comments that are being made. And this is directed particularly to the engineer. Mr. Lawyer, you've been very clear that you've advocated for people on both sides of the issue, and I applaud you for that. But I'm not happy with how this is going tonight. In this process, I haven't felt that we've gotten a clear answer about other tower modifications in the last 6 months. A lot is happening, and it's happening quickly. Is it possible that you would reconsider waiting a year and see what else pops up for towers, what improvements might happen? I'm not sure that we're really making clear to you that we're very, very upset, and you got to do a little more to convince us that this is a proper project for this area at this time with this coverage. And that's all I have to say.
Well, on the first part, I think you've made that, I think we understand that that is clear. That I would agree. We hear the sentiment. I'm sure industrial hears that. I appreciate that. I just wanted to address on a broad spectrum.
Interested in your opinion. I'm interested in the opinion from the engineer. Please.
If we can provide the needed coverage from an existing site anywhere, we would drop this project because we would be wasting a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of money for something that's not needed. So we will look, we have, in anything that's come up recently, we will look again and make sure that it doesn't provide the coverage to the gap.
Questions from residents without objection. Manager has a question as well.
Thank you.
Can I?
You may. You may.
Yep, I think it's a Carhartt jacket. I don't want to presuppose. All right, Mr. in the Carhartt jacket. Mr. Reed, I did confirm with Kevin, please submit those 12 PUC provisions to John, Broker Campbell. We'll take a double look at them. If you're correct that there's another provision that, there's another tower that can work, as Kevin said, we'd go on that tower. We think we have covered the universe, but that was the question. So I don't want to have a direct communication for a whole bunch of reasons, but if you can submit those to John, if you have a list of them, Kevin's committed, we'll look at those again. That would be me. Yes, I am.
So just a question. If the tower were to be built, what is the plans for decommissioning the tower? Typical towers have a lifespan of about 30 years. What surety do you build into your permit for decommissioning the tower and then taking it down?
I mean, typically what Vermont is a little different because it's a state PUC process. What towns require in other areas where you get the approval through the municipality is we would post a bond. So if we disappeared, the resources would be there to remove the tower if it wasn't being used or it became obsolete.
Any other questions from the Planning Commission? Or from the Select Board? John, do you have another question? Just want to make sure that we're okay.
So what is the timeline from today? What does it look like from application to construction?
Don't have an exact timeline. I mean, we're going to take into account the information that we received tonight, including the towers that some feel that we didn't see or review or missed. The application could be filed in the next 30 to 60 days, but it's a process. So as far as construction, we're pretty far away from that. I don't have a timeline for that.
I'm trying. So I do hear you talking about what you feel is necessary for coverage for us and also for what you need for your company. I'd like you to disaggregate that if you could, please, and talk about the coverage of the tower that's needed for you to touch and contact the other towers you have to make your services link up together versus what's the height of the tower that's needed to provide the coverage that you feel is so lacking in our poor town of Hartland.
Company, we're a structure provider, so we're not looking at it just for our stuff. We're looking at it for us and the wireless carriers, so I can't separate the two.
I have a financial question in parts. Number one, how much are you paying for the lease of the land? How much are you paying to create this whole project? And how much money do you expect to make on the backs of Hartland and our beautiful area up there?
Those are private business matters between us and the landowner, so we don't disclose that to the public, nor do we disclose the kind of money it costs to build the site or what the carriers pay.
You want to know everything. I don't blame you, but I was just kind of curious.
Barbara Peck again. I missed the very beginning. I was a couple minutes late. Are these plans available online? And if not, will they be?
It should be available on the EPUC website. I think the town also has them available.
So if I could make a request that if you could send these plans to me directly, we could make them available on the town's website to make them more readily accessible.
I believe you'll find most of these already on the Planning Commission's website. We do deal with these all the time. We have, we think, a pretty full set. And I will also add that we're also filing some of the more recent material that's come from the state. ITW's objection to the findings of the federal judge. Also some other attorneys that are working on the cases. So anything that's in the Planning Commission file, we'll make sure is available on our website, and we'll get together with John to see if we want to just create one site or if people can go either place.
There is? Okay. Okay, we're good. David Lyman, and it's asking, does the PUC make them bond for the tower?
Bond for removal.
I have not seen that happen, but I don't know if it's within their jurisdiction or authority to do that.
Betsy, excuse me, Betsy Wing. I live on Garvin Hill Road. And in relationship to this gentleman's comment about your graphics, There was a photographer who came to my land, spent a half an hour taking pictures of the view of the proposed tower from my property. I've lived there for 30 years, and I never intended to buy that property if I was going to be looking at an industrial site.
That anyone would like? Was before we go back to Bruce, is there anyone else who would like to ask a question? Okay.
Do you folks have a website that shows some of the kinds of towers that you've done so that people could look at that and say, ah, this is what it's going to look like. It's not going to look like that, like a little oil well, but something that shows all these different things on it so that everybody can look at it at their leisure. Thank you.
We do. It's igwllc.com.
Sorry.
igwllc.com.
Wow. Yep. Okay.
Sherry Clark, have our emergency services explicitly stated they've had problems with communication in receiving emergency responses?
Spoken directly to them about this project.
Okay, let's call ourselves back to order. I don't think there's any follow-up comments on the ITW discussion.
I disagree.
Okay, then let's turn to that and on that part.
So we have not decided, as a board, we have not decided whether or not we're going to be participating in the 248A, and we made a motion or whatever we did do that? No, but as a board, we have not decided whether we're going to participate.
Should participate in the 248A
Right.
proceedings because there is still, the date, still not a formal proceeding to participate in.
No, but we are not going to have a lot of time once the application comes out, and they are going to file fairly soon, I would imagine.
Say 30 to 60 days.
That's right.
May 14th deadline. They have to file within 180 days of submitting their 60-day notice.
So I don't want to run into what we ran into on another land use issue in town. And so I think we should be as transparent as possible as far as what we're going to do. So I think we should have a motion one way or the other, or just vote it down to say we will seek intervener status or not and participate in the thing and then talk to an attorney.
Go in with our eyes open.
Yeah, I think Tom's.
I think we should go ahead and go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I was going to say I support Tom. I think he's got the right plan there.
Yeah, I agree.
Can it be repeated?
So, yeah, and I want to make one other.
Right, we don't have a motion yet. We're just talking about the idea.
If we decide to have this, we are going to have one attorney representing the town of Hartland, that we will not fund the planning commission if they decide they wanted to have a different attorney. There'll be one attorney.
Correct. I think we talked about the last board meeting speaking a single voice on this project. So we have an agreement with an attorney who has experience in working with the PUC already, so that's in place. He and I have communicated already. We are aware that once an application is submitted, that 30 days will be very quick. Right. So getting comments, starting those comments ahead of that, in anticipation of that application, is what we are working on.
And so but I want to make sure we formally have communicated that message to the planning commission and that they need to provide us with whatever information we would like to relay to the attorney. So that
I agree. So I can write to the chair asking that, stating that we are, as a town, having one attorney, and that any correspondence that needs to go goes through John to coordinate.
Yeah, I think that's right too, Phil. One person coordinates communications through the attorney.
Right. Yeah. I know. What we want to avoid is multiple people having the attorney's phone number.
Right. No, it should only be you. Yeah. But here's one word of caution. Don't take 30 days as gospel. If they choose, they can turn around and file tomorrow.
No, absolutely, Jim. No, I think it's good advice.
Okay, so Tom, would you like to make a motion to get us in that direction?
What's the name of the attorney?
It's Monahan and Safar.
So I make a motion that the town of Hartland retain the services of Monahan and Safar to represent the town of Hartland in the Section 248 application for the ITW tower.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Okay, thank you. Okay. And I think we just need to continue to have a dialogue so that if there are multiple attorneys involved, that our attorney knows how to dovetail with the.
Right, and in fact, in speaking with ITW's attorney who was here just briefly, we will probably start that communication process can start this week.
Which
I'm also actually more interested in coordinating our attorney with the local residents who also have an attorney or multiple attorneys as well. So we should try to have some type of, and they actually asked that, one of their attorneys asked that of us after the meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, John.
So I'll talk to our attorney. There are different interests at stake.
Right.
The town's interests are not necessarily the residents' interests.
It's just more, what are people providing for testimony, for filings? So we're not having duplicate filings.
Sure.
And it could be
okay.
that the abutters are doing the lion's share of the filing compared to what we're going to do. I don't know. I think it would just be nice to know what people are doing.
Okay.
And yes, to stay in sync and also to make sure that we're not conflicting something, without realizing that we're conflicting something.
Yeah, so John, I guess you'll figure it out. I think where you were going, it's a little bit tricky because an attorney represents their client. And it gets a little tricky when you have multiple clients and multiple attorneys communicating, right? But they have rules of engagement that they'll follow.
That one's mine.
Sorry, guys.
In case of the missing cell phone.
Okay. Beware of this man looking around for cell phones. He's going to throw out anything.
Okay.
Okay. Any other ITW?
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
And we'll just to follow up, we'll get the feedback from them and we'll get that posted to the town website so it's readily available. Yes, it's available online through the PUC, but you really have to effort to get to it. So we can make it more accessible.
Okay. There's no other old business that's gone to the town manager update.
So just real quick, given the time, it was yet again another very busy weekend for the road crew. They did an outstanding job. I think they deserve all the commendations that people can find their way to make for them. It's been a really challenging winter this year. I think you see that in the payables with the amount of salt that we're getting delivered. Kind of sometimes twice a week for salt deliveries. We've kind of gone through more sand than we anticipated, so we're going to have to start buying sand. However, the roads are in great shape. This storm in particular, they've worked almost every holiday that we've had since Thanksgiving and weekends. So I just want to shout out to the road crew. They've been doing a fantastic job.
I agree. I mean, just to throw the kudos out there, our roads were better than West Windsor's in the last storm. And John, I'm going to have my mail delivered to your office from now on.
Yes. Yes.
To say that we have told
one of the trucks, the red truck, the 550, it's kind of losing some acceleration, which is causing some braking issues. They're taking it up to a new car in Lebanon to have it diagnosed. We don't anticipate it being a long-term problem. It's been a problem truck for next year. That truck hopefully has at least one more winter in it. The reappraisal RFP that was put out in early December is due next Thursday. So we anticipate getting those results and then opening them with the listers. Again, there's only a handful of firms in the state of Vermont who are qualified to work. So, and then based on recent reports from Act 68 and talking with NIMRIC, folks are talking reappraisals in 2028 or 2029. More than half the state, 2/3 of the state is under order to reappraise. So, right.
Where are we with numeric as a potential support for listers?
Yep.
Should the article pass?
So it's a relatively straightforward contract, and it's not been signed, but I think what we have to work through first is what happens in that interim to get this grand list done. So Phil and I are meeting with the listers tomorrow to talk about kind of that gap. So from town meeting to the end of June, we will probably need to contract with the existing listers to finalize that grand list. An outside firm is not going to want to come in to work that they didn't really do and sign it.
Does the state need our
I was like, it's the end of June, right? Cheyenne, I'm looking to our former lister over here. June.
July 1st.
I thought it was July 1st. Yeah.
Rebates.
Yeah. So, and then just real quick, just so everybody's aware, Monday is the Hartland Elementary School budget presentation meeting.
So John, can we talk back to the listers for a minute?
Sure.
Yeah. So you're going to look into a contract, right? And you're going to have that run by the lawyer as well to make sure it's a well-defined short-term contract.
The short-term contract we might sign with the existing listers.
Right.
Yes. Yes, okay. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would like to do it as a get an anticipation of what the work entails and then get a set number of hours.
Yeah.
And say, for here's an X number of hours to complete this work, as opposed to we will continue to pay you 25 hours per week until the work is done.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. And maybe, an ability to do an extension if you need it.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Other than that, it's been relatively quiet. There was a holiday. There was a couple of snowstorms. Things are moving along, but by and large, we're in good shape.
Some dates of a recount then.
There is the next date. Sorry, I'm opening my calendar. So that was that mistake. That was that public notice that went out in error that we couldn't retract in time. That is not an actual warning on the town plan readoption. I will be here that night to tell folks that it was a mistake and to they should go home and have dinner. The first public hearing is March 3rd at 5 o'clock. Monday, March 3rd. I did have one other quick thing. We can talk about it now or on March 3rd. We did get 3 quotes for the North Hartland Fire Department furnace replacement. Do you all want to review those quotes, or should we go with the lowest bidder for the furnace replacement? They are all reputable companies. 1 larger company, 2 smaller folks. 1 is a local person who does this type of work.
Who's going to back it up?
They were very. I don't.
If you're gonna, you ought to make sure you get a maintenance contract in there too.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. So I think we're. Yeah, it's in enough dire of a situation that we should take action sooner rather than later. Yep. Yep. Okay.
Town meeting starts at 9.
Yeah, town meeting starts at 9.
I have a.
We will effort to make some microphones work a little better for town meeting.
Is there a possibility that instead of us sitting on the stage and then having to get out of the way for the show, that we could sit right down in front of the stage, like
Yeah, but across in front of the stage, and then.
Right, I think there's more chairs. We'll set it up and see if there's space, but yes, it is as opposed to having everybody on the stage for a few minutes and then getting down. Yeah, let's see if we can set it up in a way that it works, we'll do that.
Yeah.
Have a meeting with Matt to kind of work out.
Correct. That's not yet scheduled, but
I think it's volunteer of the year. To the conservation. Their volunteer work. I think it's great to recognize volunteers. Shouldn't take 15 minutes.
right, and then it'll be the conversation. That'll be that conversation that we have with Matt prior, the sit down we have with Matt. Yep. Chris, March 3rd at 5 p.m. The 2017 Town Plan Readoption Public Hearing number 1. March 3rd at 5:30 p.m. we will do a very brief select board meeting. At a location to be determined. Because downstairs will be set up for voting, upstairs will be set up for town meeting. But we'll figure it out. And then March 4th is town meeting. You are not required. I just wanted to put it on your radar. That is the Monday, the 24th here at Damon Hall. Yeah, the town reports came in today. It's in the town report. Town meeting, yes.
Just aside, early 8:30. The Windsor school budget is a higher percentage increase than ours per pupil.
24th. Yep. I have no other business.
His camera's on, it's not.
Right.